I'm here to talk about my year-long project that we, after going through the project and kind of pivoting, have decided to name Considerations of Environmental Justice Problems. So, as many of you know, environmental justice strives to treat everybody equally with respect to the environment. So making sure everybody has clean access to water, clean air, things like that. In my undergrad, in a department I shall not name, we focused a lot on like the Flint water crisis and environmental injustices within our class. So I've really grown to be interested in environmental justice problems. And through my undergrad and my grad program, I've gotten really interested in air quality. And air quality, there are a lot of environmental injustices there too. A lot of areas experience low income and racial and ethnic minorities tend to experience the brunt and higher levels of air pollutants. This is oftentimes because they reside near some of these places. This is actually a picture taken from the city where you see all of this residential area right across the street from large industrial areas. And because they don't have the ability to move elsewhere, they experience these high levels of pollutants that cause adverse health effects, such as respiratory problems, premature death. So my project, I've kind of focused it a little bit more than just environmental injustice and air quality. I looked specifically at the city of Detroit. For my project, I wanted to look at particulate matter and ozone. I wanted to see if there were differences between air pollutant levels and different income groups. I came into the project assuming there would be. I would find some of those differences. So the rest of my project was focused on identifying some of those factors that are contributing to that pollution, and then giving recommendations to reduce these pollutants. Ultimately, the deliverable that I assumed I would make would be a paper detailing my analysis and then giving recommendations to reduce these pollutants. So to start the project, I had to define the system, define what I was looking at. What is Detroit? I decided to look at the city rather than the metropolitan area. It gets really hazy and what is metropolitan Detroit if you try to do that. So I looked at just the city. The city released something, I think in 2019, that they identified low income as at about $50,000. So I used that as my basis. Since the city released that, we just ran with that. I had to ask questions about how I'd analyze the data. Would I look at pollutant emissions, highest levels of pollutants in these areas, or average pollutant concentrations? And then what areas would I look at? Would I look at blocks? Would I look at neighborhoods, census tracts? And these last two questions were the answers were pushed by my access to data. The data I found had average concentrations for census tracts. So because I had access to that, we kind of ran with that. And so with that, I plotted monthly average pollutant data to these census tracts to see if there were differences between the months in the census tracts, if some census tracts continually experienced higher levels of pollutants. And then I compared those monthly pollutant levels to income levels. I was advised to also look at stagnation events such as heat waves, because during heat waves, air pollution levels are typically higher. So I also did that comparison there. So fall semester, I spent most of my time kind of creating the project and looking at particulate matter. Beginning of the semester, looked at ozone, and we kind of came to a dead end where most of my analysis wasn't really showing anything. These are a couple of graphs here where you can't draw a clear correlation between the data. Differences are also really minuscule, so it was really hard to draw a correlation. Because of this, it kind of became a null point to identify factors for pollutants, because these average pollutants that I found were also well below NAAQS standards. So it felt like a null point to give recommendations to reduce pollutants when pollutants were already fairly low. So Ricky helped me brainstorm on ways that we could kind of save the project. So we shifted to giving steps and tips to tackling environmental justice problems so that future students have some ideas on how to go about the project. So kind of conclusions. As I said, there wasn't really correlation between higher pollutants and low income areas. The differences were very small. Particulate matter differences, like the highest month was like 1.5 micrograms per meter cube. So not large. Some high income areas too experience higher levels of ozone, which completely makes my hypothesis null. And as I said, all of these levels were below NAAQS standards. So it was kind of hard to say, yes, there are differences when the EPA would deem this as clean air. So the steps and considerations I have for future environmental justice problems, in hindsight, they really go for all kind of open-ended projects like the ones we're doing. You really need to define the problem in your approach kind of quite well. What is an environmental injustice? What are you looking for? What are the variables, parameters you are going to have for your project? This was something I learned the hard way. As my analysis just kind of became null, it was really hard to not want to make my data show something that wasn't there. So really leaving perceptions and expectations out of this analysis. Sometimes your results just don't show you anything. And then lastly, I think the most important is to not devalue the lived experience. Michael talked a lot about providing solutions that actually help people, and it's not maladaptation. Coming in, I was like, yeah, there's a lot of industrial sites. It makes sense to just close all these sites to reduce pollution, but that really takes away from the livelihood of a lot of the people that live in the area. So kind of thinking of solutions that don't negatively affect these people and actually positively impact them. I believe my project is complete. I've really beat the analysis to death with what I wanted to look at. And since the analysis kind of came to a null point, the rest of the project became null. I provided steps for future students so they could do something similar. Well, I think my project is done. I do think there are opportunities for students to do something similar. Environmental injustice problems are problems that need to be solved. So I don't think people should be scared to kind of tackle them. They should learn kind of from what I have done and from others to take on a project similar to this. But a quick caution is just projects might not end up the way you think. Yeah. And then what did I learn from the year? As I've said many times now, environmental justice issues and open-ended projects are hard to tackle. There are a lot of working systems, a lot of things you have to define and make sure they're working well. Yeah, it's hard to get it all working together and to consider everything in your analysis and results. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's very helpful to talk to different experts, different professors here. They really do want to help and they have a lot more expertise than I think I do sometimes. And I really like to have all my ducks in a row. So to just switch directions mid-project was really hard. But learned that that's okay too. It doesn't always go the way you think it does. And my last slide, a thank you to everybody. I did not list the cohort, but a thank you to you all as well. It's Michael, and I was like,
same thing. Wow, Erin likes Michael more than anyone else in the cohort.
You got me a gift. True.
Yeah. I got you an MSGC t-shirt.
That's true.
Got me coffee one time.
That's actually right.
Shall we open up to questions? Rather just recollections of various gifts. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah. Go for it. You stole his thunder last time.
I'm just curious if, and like it's like all the way, like, you know, closed off, wrapped up, this kind of thing. But did you think about the potential for like different kinds of pollution to like peak pollutant instead of like monthly averages, or like I'm just curious about like what was the availability of data that you were working with and like how that informed, you know, the path that you took.
A lot of this data I just found 4588 and Allison is like run with it. So by the time I got to beginning of like this semester, where I had done a bunch of the analysis, didn't really get anywhere with it. Michael was like, just kind of continue with it. We'll see where it goes. Even though I knew it might be a better idea to go with something such as like peak concentrations. I'm not really sure the access to that, because once we kind of decided to run with it, I didn't seek out other data sources.
Ricky, did you intentionally unmute yourself?
Yes, I did.
Okay, then let's open it to Ricky.
So I actually have three things, maybe four. The first being the interest, an interesting coincidence to me is on all of the talks that I've heard today so far. I have heard something in the news relevant to them within the last 3 days. So I think the current nature of the projects is actually quite valuable. One relevant to this project is that in sometime today, Biden has signed an executive order to put social justice and environmental justice into government projects. So I think that's happened today. The second thing on the pollution aspect of it, driving around the country, there was a report, I think it was on air pollution and violation days in Charlotte, North Carolina. And what was a little bit shocking to me, both in ozone and in particulates, they've only exceeded the EPA limits on the average of 4 times per year, which seems remarkably low to me. And that was considered a poor grade. So it seems to me that compared to 30 or 40 years ago, we must have cleaned up the air a whole lot, which has got to be contributing to the fact that you found that we don't have that many bad days anymore. Mm-hmm. The third thing is buried deep in the material on knowledge systems in 480, and I don't know if you remembered it, is that one of the goals of what I call the inventory and analysis phase of the projects, or of what we're doing, is to separate what we know from what we think we know from what we want. Mm-hmm. And I think that this project is a really nice, the summary you made is a really nice example of that, because I've seen a lot of projects, especially social justice projects, having a what we want in it. Mm-hmm. And so having you articulate that so clearly, I think is quite important and powerful.
Thank you.
Olivia.
I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on like the level that the EPA considers harmful for us in the air. Do you find anything about that?
I don't think it's a bad idea to like continue to revise it. I think most of the levels aren't revised too often. I think they revised like particulate matter and ozone in like 2015. But I don't think it's a bad idea to continue to want to strive for lower limits.
Lauren.
And so this might be like going completely against what the point you just made, but I guess in what you've like read throughout doing this project and like your opinion based on that, do you think that you weren't finding kind of the results you expected or the trend you expected based on like the data you're using and the resources you had, or because it like wasn't there?
I think a little bit of both. Coming in, I thought particulate matter was a big issue within Detroit. And then Michael was like, you should double check to make sure that they're like in non-attainment. Found out they're in attainment for particulate matter. But in hindsight, a lot of the articles talked about toxic metals, because they're really close to some of these refineries and stuff. So it could be a mixture of both, that like ozone isn't as bad, and I should have looked at something different like toxic metals. Also, yeah, to Michael's point, like looking at peak emissions rather, or not peak emissions, peak concentrations rather than average concentrations. Because if we get like a little blip in the day, we're not, once we average it, we're not really going to see that blip. If that makes sense.
And that's how the EPA standards are too, right? It's like average daily or average weekly concentrations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that the department that we're not supposed to name is Civil and Environmental Engineering. We have actually a great relationship. I don't know why it got weird. We actually have a really good relationship with them. We do the air and they do the water, so we sound really well. But what I was actually gonna say is that my experience working in Detroit is that the starting point of anything to do with environmental justice or communities is usually a community inventory of what they care about. Is it air quality? And going back many decades, I think one of the things that you will see in Detroit and actually Washtenaw County is concerns over ground pollution and soil pollution rather than air pollution. So one thing that our Dean Alec Gallimore pointed out to me a couple of weeks ago was there's a huge life expectancy gap. Willow Run Manufacturing Center, right? Massive pollution, historically Black neighborhood. And that's probably won't show up in the air quality because of all the things, and it's not even an active manufacturing plant anymore, but it almost certainly does in the ground contamination. And there's a lot of Superfund sites and other things because it's easy to clean up the air because once you do it, it goes away. Ground is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so kind of thinking about what the community has an idea of what the problems are. They might not have the data to measure it, but they probably have an idea of what they're really concerned about.
Yeah.
My other suspicion is if it was possible to look at a smaller scale, I think you're gonna find some neighborhoods are gonna start to pop out
Yeah.
with high thresholds very episodically when something happens. Because I think one of the things that has happened is a lot of polluters have gotten really good at limiting average. But they'll still spew out a lot of stuff episodically. Other questions? Well, thanks, Erin. I think that was great.